Hey there, check it out. I'm in Construct 3 and I have a character that I downloaded the artwork for from itch.io. You're probably familiar with the process, but let's take a look at this character's animations and see that we got a couple problems, and then I will show you how to fix all of those really quickly. First, we'll go ahead and hit play here, and you can see on the idle sequence, we have a problem with this one frame kind of jumping up there. That'll be easy to take care of. But here's something that's a little more difficult to take care of. Is the walk cycle, or the run cycle in this case, looks like it's working perfectly, except for you can just tell there's a little bit of like jerkiness there. There's a little bit of like the frames that are not like, they don't seem to be perfectly aligned. And so when you're dealing with animation problems, typically speaking, it's going to be one of three things, and in actuality, it's probably going to be one of the last two things. The first problem you might be having is that the actual drawn frames might be out of whack or not aligned. If you're downloading your art from itch.io, this is usually not the case because the artist typically checks this pretty carefully, but it is possible that one of these frames was just drawn too high or that the pixels were set too high or something like that. It's really easy to check by just opening up the animation you want to check and hitting the play button and looking at it, and you can see this looks perfect. None of these frames are out of whack or out of line. Out of whack is a technical term. So the second thing you'll want to check is that the pivot point, that's the point that the animation is centered around, the sort of registration point for the animation, that is the same for every single frame in your animation. And it's really easy to do that. You just go over to the pivot point tool here on the left of the sprite sheet editor, and then you could go through every single frame and check to make sure that the pivot point isn't out of alignment. And that's certainly a fine way to do that. The other way to do that would be to take the pivot point and move it to where you want it to be for all of your animations. And the clicker in Construct is not as accurate as I feel like it should be, so the best thing to do is actually to just type in the values that you want. And this is a 32 by 32 sprite, so I know 16 is half for the X. And then 32 pixels to put the pivot point at the bottom. This pivot point actually has a name, and you can see that name over here. It's called Origin. You can see that over here on the image points area. You could right click here and select a new image point, which you can use to align other objects to. But you don't have to go and do this for every single frame. You don't have to align every frame. You can just go over here to Origin, the pivot point you want to use, right click on it, and say apply to whole animation. Now that in this case would only apply it to run. If all of your sprites for this character in the sprite sheet are 32 by 32, you could say apply to all animations, and that would apply it to both run and idle. It would give it a pivot point at 16 by 32 for everything. We definitely want it for this one, so we'll say apply to whole animation. We'll go ahead and check this one. We want this one at the bottom too, 16 by 32, and so I'll right click and say apply to whole animation. Then we'll close it out and we'll hit play, and we'll see that that fixed the issue with the idle frame, but we're still having that lack of smoothness with the run animation. You kind of see how it's bouncing around. And again, problems with animation in Construct are usually three things. So let's go ahead and select the run animation, click play, and make sure this isn't a drawing problem. Again, that looks fine. We know it's not an origin point or an image point problem because we have the image point or the pivot point where we want. We've right clicked and we've selected apply to whole animation, so we know it's the same everywhere. So the third thing that it could be is that the collision box around this is not the same on every frame, and so the object or the player is actually falling. Let's take a look at that, and we'll go ahead and right below the pivot point tool here, we'll find the collision box tool. So when you import from itch.io, Construct tries to automatically draw the collision box to the shape of the sprite. And that's cool, except for as it sort of moves up and down, you can see that the collision box gets closer to the bottom. Like there, it's touching the bottom on frame 4, but on frame 2, it's quite a few pixels above it. And this causes the character within its animation cycle, its run cycle, to kind of fall and go up and down and interact with this solid ground plane in a weird way. So we have this layer that has the tile map solid on it and the player above it. And as that run animation plays, that collision box is changing, which is causing the player to sort of fall and bump around because it is like falling down until that collision box interacts with that solid. So an easy way to fix this is to pick one frame of your animation that is bumping around like that, and we're going to go ahead and right click on the collision box, and we're going to choose set to bounding box. And that's going to get rid of all of the pivot points and just give us a square. Again, like the pivot point, we want to kind of move these around to get them close to what we want, and then we'll go in and set exact values. Now you can decide what you want your collision box to look like. You could go ahead and add a point and try to round it out. The main important thing is that the registration point of the collision box, which are these two bottom ones here that are along the line, that those generally speaking have the same Y value. So we'll go 6 for there and then 6 for there, and we'll go looks like 26 in the X. So now when I click on these two bottom ones, the ones that are rubbing against the floor, I know they're both at 32. It doesn't really matter in this case what the other ones are at unless you're having problems with that. So I'll just put that one at 7, and then I'll match this one to that one, which was 26. So the X value for this will also be 26 to match the top one, and that'll give us a little bit of a rectangle. If you want to match this one, then the X value was 6 to match the top, and now we have a rectangle. And so now it doesn't match the character perfectly. So then again, you don't have to do this for every frame. You just do it for one frame, make sure it fits reasonably well, and then right click and select Apply to Whole Animation. Now the registration point at the bottom for the collision box is the same, even though the character is moving around inside that collision box. You have to decide for your game how acceptable that is. If you need to go into certain frames and, for example, bring the height down a little bit of the collision box to account for where the character is. But you'll see now, though, if we hit play with the collision box adjusted, the animation is much more smooth. So that's 3 things that might be causing problems with your animation. Hey, if you liked this video, do me a favor and give it a like right now. And if you think, hey, this is going to be helpful, I want to learn about Construct and making games and little tips and tricks, well, that's what I do on the Construct a Game channel. So give the channel a subscribe, and I'll see you real soon with another Construct tutorial.